Before I introduce the panel, I want to start with a real fast story that I think is very applicable to the topic that we're going to be talking about. So let's call this person a young late 20, 30-something who is here at ITExpo and is busy looking at their smart device and not paying attention to the light out here, and they get hit by a bus. And the next thing they know, they're in the cloud, right? They're in limbo. First thing that happens is they notice this little red guy with a tail who's coming up to him, and he says, you know, you're in limbo, you're going to have a choice to make. You can either go to heaven or hell. Let me show you what hell looks like, because I think there's a really good value proposition here that you're going to enjoy. So he pops up a screen, and he shows these pictures of nightclub, great music, fabulous playlist, young people all having a great time. And he says, that's me. There's a guy coming who you're going to talk to next, who's an angel, and he's going to show you what heaven's like. Devil disappears, angel shows up. Angel pops up his screen, says, this is what heaven looks like. And all it is a picture of a cul-de-sac, very nice homes, strollers with babies in them, bucolic music playing in the background, trees. Devil comes back, says, okay, you have to make a choice. And the guy says, oh my God, are you kidding? I'm going to hell. Bang. Next thing he knows, first thing he knows is there's this horrible sulfur smell, and it's really hot, and everybody looks really depressed and angry. And the devil comes by, and he says, so what do you think? And he goes, this is nothing like what you were showing me, right? And he goes, well, up there you were a prospect, down here you're a customer, right? So the reason I said that is that at the end of the day, and we've been talking about this with a bunch of the panelists here for part of the show, is the future of the service provider and the future of basically everybody in this audience in large measure is going to be driven by capturing and pleasing customers, and somebody who shall remain nameless actually said, by the way, the customer is internal as well, and that every call that is ever made and every session that is ever initiated should be treated as a customer call, because ultimately we're customers of IT, we're customers of the CEO, all the C-levels, we're just customers in different contexts. So what we're going to try and talk about today is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, because I've been in the industry way too long, and have lived through Computer Inquiry 1, Computer Inquiry 2, and the consolidation, restructuring of the industry, both here in the United States and globally. We're going to talk about what is the future of the service provider, what business should they be in, and based on that discussion, okay, so how do they get from where we are today, based on what I said on the earlier panel, that we're at a tipping point in the industry, and long-term destiny is going to be determined in the next 12 months. Can service providers change culturally and every other way in order to be able to capitalize on the opportunity that they have based on the asset base that they have? So I don't do long-winded introductions. There was a Secretary of Agriculture in the Eisenhower administration who said one of the most profound things I've ever heard, which is where you stand depends on where you sit, where you sat. So with that said, I am going to let the panel do two things: introduce themselves and then tell us where they sit. You will notice there are no service providers on here, so this is Dear Abby, right? We're going to be giving advice. So
I'll kick it off. I'm Craig Walker, CEO of a company that built a service called Uber Conference. It's a visual conference call service. I used to run Google Voice, and before that, Yahoo Voice. And where I sit, as far as carriers go, we're an over-the-top and always have been kind of an over-the-top service provider.
So we have an over-the-top service provider.
All right, my name is Steve Johnson. I'm with a company called Ingate Systems. Ingate is in the business of supplying enterprise session border controllers. You might ask yourself, why would I be on this panel? And the reason I'm on this panel is that we have a yet different idea of where the service provider may want to move in the future to preserve revenue. And we believe that enterprise session border controllers may have a place to play in that new model.
And I'm Dave Walters with Sansei in business development. And we are a session border controller that serves the carrier market, both wholesale as well as retail providers.
I'm David Tipping from Sonos Networks. We make solutions from the wiring closet for enterprises all the way to the central office for the service providers. We look at the service providers as being one of our go-to-market avenues as they provide communication and integration services for lots of enterprises.
Rene Chotola from CGI, not Clinton Global Initiative, by the way. We're a consulting firm, system integrator, and an IT and business process provider. If you haven't heard of us, we probably are the largest company you've never heard of. We've grown over the past 36 years. In absolute numbers, from 1994, we were 1,800 professionals and about $96 million in revenue. Today, we are 71,000 and over 10 billion. Our last quarterly results showed an end-to-end growth of 148%. My role is I'm the vice president in telecom and media. I lead the Mobility Council, which is a horizontal, and I'm also the vice chair of the Global Technology Council.
Okay, so as you can see, we have a really good diversity of advisors. I want to start with a show of hands. How many people in this room believe that 5 years from now, most of the legacy physical network service providers are basically going to be dumb pipe companies? Okay. We're going to ask the same question when we're done to see if anybody has changed their mind. The reason Renee is here is Jason Collins from Alcatel-Lucent got the flu and couldn't join us, and Renee was on a panel that I sat through yesterday on the future of service providers. I want to start with you briefly to talk about what I started with about, so where are we in terms of the businesses that they are in, and what businesses should they be in?
So if you look at the root cause, we're all going to IP. Now, what does it mean? Everything is an application. What does that mean? Everybody is on everybody else's turf. So to put it simply, all of CSPs are at crossroads. Do they retrench and become a dumb pipe provider, or happy piper, if you want a kind of word? Or do they become a full service provider? Make no mistake, this is a very hard choice for them to make. They become a dumb pipe provider, means significantly reducing the size of their company. So think of yourselves as the CEOs going in front of the board, putting that proposition on the table. The other side, which is where right now most providers are talking about, trying to get there, is equally difficult. Because you have to become a full service provider, think about it as a solution provider. And probably the best example of the difficulty, which is in the public domain, is from BT, British Telecom in the UK. They did the National Health Service project. About 3 years ago, they were saying how great it was going. 3 months later, they were writing off £1.3 billion. So not an easy transition for any CSP to make.
Dave, and then Dave.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the Telecommunications Act of '96, you take it and you take monopolies and you break them up. And in essence, if you were an enterprise, you had to be within 18,000 feet of the service provider in order to get services from. So think about it as you're a large multinational corporation. Actually, let's just start off with a corporation in the United States that has multiple locations. Before 1996, you could look at 1 or 2 places in order to get your services. After 96, what you ended up having was having to look at various small SPs in order to provide your services to locations. The nice thing about IP, like Renee said, is it allows the service providers to start competing outside of the market, exactly where they want to be able to encroach in locations they weren't able to participate with before. And I do agree with Renee, is there's an evolution that the service providers have to go through, where they're not only providing the pipe, but they're also providing the professional service and the consultative services in order to enable UC. And over again, that's what I'm seeing out of the largest enterprises. They start off with a discussion that they want to relegate the service provider to being just my connection. And what ends up happening is they turn back to service providers because of years of experience in order to be the provider end-to-end to the solutions, whether it be for DIDs or for integration.
Well, I think it's oftentimes harsh to see a term like a dumb pipe, and I think it hurts people's feelings. So, but I think it's actually...
Stop right there. How many people's feelings have been hurt? No one. No one. We're going to talk to you later. Go ahead.
But I think that's a criticism that's been levied mainly by Wall Street and venture capitalist types that are seeing the world in terms of very disruptive changes. But if you also look at how Wall Street takes that to another degree, if you look at the valuation of a company like Level 3, who has about $6 billion in revenue and has a market cap of $5 billion in their stock and $8 billion in debt, versus someone like Salesforce.com, who has a market cap of $24 billion on revenue of $2 billion. So this is really, I think there's a serious criticism here, and I think there are real consequences, that the investment community is really looking beyond network providers, and they're looking at the application providers today.
But we have to temper that with that the service providers are a safe haven because they pay good dividends, right? And they're regulated, so there's a known revenue stream there. So valuations are tricky out of context.
I think it's just a starting point for the discussion.
Yes. Okay. Steve.
Okay, so the service providers are in a very, I guess they're at a crossroads. I guess everybody is saying the same thing, that we are moving fast away from the plain old telephony services of 100 years or more, and we are moving into this brand new world, probably a brave new world of IP telephony, IP communications. And they have to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. So I don't think that the term dumb pipe is the right terminology to use. I think the question is, do they turn what now may be considered dumb pipes into smart pipes? And could they, in fact, leverage some of the new technologies and new applications that are coming down that could, in fact, erode their revenue? Take something like WebRTC or an over-the-top service like UberConference that may erode their revenue stream. And could they find a way to actually recover and actually enhance their revenue stream from moving that information across their smart pipes in a smarter way than they currently do? And I think our position on that is there is a way to do that. It involves a very, I don't know if disruptive is the right terminology, but certainly a different paradigm for the carriers or the service providers to offer that service and to stay in the loop when it comes to generating revenue on calls or sessions that may be delivered through those smart pipes. And that, I think, is where the service providers really need to consider revising the way they're doing business and not using SIP and WebRTC as simple replications of the 100-year-old service, but doing something unique and different. And if they can do that, they can stay both vital and they can turn those dumb pipes into smart pipes. And I think we know the way to do that.
You agree? I saved you for last on purpose.
Well, I think they've been dumb pipes for the last 10 years. I don't think it's in 5 years. When I think about it, what's the last service feature that's been introduced by an incumbent carrier? Caller ID, call waiting. I mean, it's been forever. But there's nothing wrong with being a dumb pipe or providing a really high quality pipe. I mean, I pay Verizon a lot of money every month for that pipe. So the last thing I think I'd ever kind of like sit and pine for is hoping the incumbent service providers start trying to be more than a dumb pipe, because, geez, anytime you get or deal with your incumbent carrier for a feature or a service, I mean, it's expensive, it's a pain. I mean, just go to Verizon's what, a $100+ billion company. Go to their website and try to do something other than pay your bill and buy another phone. It's, you'd think someone would have some design aesthetic, but it doesn't exist. And you buy a mobile phone, and the carrier slaps their own nav app and their own maps and their own this. I spend the first half hour trying to delete all the incumbents' apps because they're so crappy. So I just say, I go entirely the other way. I'd say, look, focus where you're great. And you're great at providing connectivity and really high quality connectivity. And by the way, people are paying you a ton of money for it. So it's not like you're going to shrink and shrivel into this tiny company. You embrace it and move on from there.
Another quick show of hands, just out of curiosity. I have 3 different GPS capabilities on my phone. The one I use is not the one from my carrier. Anybody actually use the GPS service from their service provider? 1 person. Point taken, right? This panel could go on all day. There's a lot of different issues, net neutrality. Is VoIP a common carriage service, or is it an information service that shouldn't be regulated? At the end of the day, if you were running one of the incumbents, right? Tell me 1, 2, 3. What are the things that I should be in? Because my view of the industry has always been these companies are really good at 3 things, right? Deploying plant, managing plant, and billing people. Right? And that what the internet has changed was that the value used to be in if I controlled the connection, I controlled the customer, and I could bill them, right? The internet says the value is in the servers and in the network, maybe in the smart edge, but that I got to rethink the rest of this, right? So 25 years ago I wrote a study that said the best thing that could happen to the world would be if the then Bell companies in the United States divested their outside plant and just went into the services business. I still believe that's true, and I think Wall Street would love it because we don't need 2 people tearing up the ground in my neighborhood to offer me an electric utility or a gas or, that the communications has gone there. Top 3 things you're running Verizon that you think you should be concentrating on in the next 2 years?
So I would say this is not only about Verizon, right? This is about any CSP. I would do 1 thing actually, not 3 things, because that's what we have seen, frankly, a lot of providers missing. I showed a slide yesterday and it had 5 arrows. And the first arrow was business strategy. The second arrow was IT strategy, followed, and they partially overlap, by the way, but not totally. The next one was architecture, then solution, choice, and implementation, and then operations, right? So call it a SOA slide, call it a common sense slide. The biggest thing, which a lot of providers don't do for various reasons, is do it in that order. And it is hard. That first arrow is really hard. And they have problems with system X, Y, and Z today. So the temptation is, okay, we've got a problem in billing and provisioning, all that, fix it. Well, what happens? After you have deployed it, you start in the middle, or maybe more to the right. After you've deployed it, you find out you get curveballs. Because all of those things which you should have known when you were choosing that solution come to you as a surprise. So what I would do, going back to that very first arrow, I would focus on that arrow and just sort of add to it. We've seen sort of 2 mistakes in addressing that arrow. One is doing it only internally. And if I look at it today, it's about a massive change, as we've all agreed. I would say it's a change from Bell heads to Google heads, right? So if you are...
Can we copyright that?
Sorry?
I love that. Can we copyright that? Eric, are you taking notes? Good.
And if you think... Whoops. So my mic got turned off now.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, the biggest risk of all is to stand still. Right? You can guarantee obsolescence, right? So if you do it only with people who are internal, you get a potentially big blind spot. You really need the challenge and all that. I would also say the other mistake is to invite the company, maybe us, maybe somebody else, to do it with no involvement of the key players in the enterprise. It's like, here is the ivory tower, you know, you've got the answer already before we started sharing our problems, you know, just come and tell us what the answer is. Both approaches are wrong, in my opinion. You have to have the mix and working together. So going back to that, I think each answer can be different for each provider. And you also need to take into account the regulatory environment. For example, in Australia, the Australian government established NBN, right? And all of the providers then need to go, and that's the network. So to supposedly even out the playing field, so they took it away from Telstra. So you need to take all of those things, the regulatory environment and your individual CSP environment, into account and make that as the first step.
Okay, 3,
Yep.
2, 1. Your choice.
Yeah, I'll go with 3. So I would embrace the change. I mean, if you look on the residential side, MSOs, the change over to wireless is happening. It happened, you lost customer base. So embrace the change that enterprises are going to move over to IP as being their mechanism in order to offer unified communications, right? 2 is to develop. And what I mean is develop services, true services, that leverage the AIN network for things as simple as free phone applications, for DIDs, so you can offer a global footprint and mesh the 2 networks together. And 3 is to accelerate. Get your sales teams acclimated to what's changing in the environment, move them to a position that they become consultative salespeople, and they can help enterprises move from where they are today on TDM technology over to a technology that allows them to accelerate their own business, to have better contact with their customers, to offer a better experience for their employees.
Your list.
I mean, I think that's, it's an easy thing to outline like that.
You can just say what he said.
Yeah, what he said, but I would say that the biggest challenge there is if you see the transfer of information from the product team to the sales team, of defining that process of turning up a new service and saying, this is the exact service that my customers want. And I think that's fair. I think that's pretty much the life cycle of getting products to market. And the reason why the criticism of dumb pipe is because it's a very hard process. To launch a new service is extremely difficult. And I think that's the challenge that the service providers are facing, is an increasingly fickle and an increasingly segmented market. And as markets mature, they segment into smaller and finer pieces. So I think we'll see that the business and the consumer market will look even more different probably in the next 18 months.
Meaning, amplify on that thought. What do you think is going to be different? I mean, is it going to be Apple and Google TV that's meshed with Wi-Fi and all kinds? I mean, there are lots of possibilities.
If you look at what WebRTC is doing, for instance, that's coming in potentially as very much of an over-the-top, cheap, almost near free voice over broadband over mobile.
Right.
And so here's a service that's coming in and it's very disruptive from the consumer side, but no business user who is on a, you know, who let's say their cost is $100 an hour, if they get on some call and it's crackling or drops because it's an OTT and it's on a platform on your phone that's probably, you know, not designed for voice.
I might humbly disagree with you, right? Which is the reality that we're still in an economic turmoil around the world. And the reality is when I get off a plane in Singapore and I can hook up to a Wi-Fi network, best effort VoIP is music to the ear of my CFO, right? So, you know, there's the consumer market, but we're in a global world where we're all nomadic and where Wi-Fi is proliferating along with small cells for cellular. There's a dynamic there that is also complicating the business that these guys want to or need to be in. Steve.
Okay, so if I'm still on the same question, I think there's at least 2 things that the service providers need to do. One is they need to recognize that they are being attacked by many, many different things. WebRTC is one of them. I think it's a disruptive, potentially disruptive technology for voice over IP. I think the other thing is things like Google Talk. And I believe that, Google is big enough and strong enough and interested enough to really make a run at taking away the services business of the current incumbent service providers. So let me just explain that I believe that there's a way for us to, the service providers, to innovate. So that's the second thing. Let's be innovative. Let's assume that you could blow up what you've built over 100 years and start over again. If you're starting over again in an all IP world, would you really centralize all of your call control and force people through what is now 100-year-old type technology? I think not. I think that we have an internet that has been built with smart routers and smart devices throughout that gives you very good quality. If you made those smart devices and turned on some of the features that those smart devices have built into them, like quality of service, and you then put a smart edge device at the edge of your enterprise customer's network, you could then use that enterprise smart edge device to be the actual intelligence in this network to figure out what to route how. So what would you route differently than just best efforts? Well, let's assume that we start to use video from the desktop. Video is very susceptible to jitter and delay and all that stuff. And if you try to run it through the current networks, either over the top or the SDN networks and so forth, the first thing is that the service provider is now out of the loop in terms of gaining any revenue from that call. What if the service provider could instead capture the call statistics from the edge device and could actually charge a premium for those better quality deliveries than is just best efforts voice? If you could charge more for the service provider to route a video call over a more quality controlled element of the network, if you could do the same thing for faxes, which today are a big problem over IP, if you could do the same for other services that you might want to take advantage of as we expand what unified communications make, then the service provider could remain in the loop for actual billing of those calls, of those sessions. So I think the most important thing I would do is look differently at how I'm actually delivering things. Because at the end of the day, I think the biggest asset that these companies have is their network. And that network needs to be revenue generating. It can't just be one price fits all. You can push as much over this as you want to. People are going to demand. It may be true today that people aren't too interested in quality over cost, but we are going to recover from this melees that we're in today. And when we do, people are going to demand better quality, and they are going to move to some of these new applications that may or may not be supplied by the service provider. But if we give the service provider the due of the asset is their network, then let's use the network and make it smart and stop playing around with it being dumb.
But by the way, just on that note, and I'm going to get to you in a second because I want to know if what everybody, the four guys in front of you said, especially what Steve just said, is if I could blow everything up and start over, would I look like Firespot? Right? But what Steve just said is a profound thought, because Google started paying Orange for traffic, which they said they would never do under net neutrality, to provide premium access for the Google ecosystem in Africa, right? That is a sea change that if you're not aware of it in this room, you need to be aware of it, right? The service provider business, to your point, is going to figure out, in theory, how to monetize the fact that the over-the-top, that we have to get back to a model that says the cost causer is the cost bearer in some way, shape, or form, right?
Right.
Which is a different way of saying what you just said.
Correct.
Okay. So are they going to look like you?
No, well, I don't think so. Going back to this, the question of what would you do if you had three things you could do, or one or two or three things. After calling them dumb pipes for the last 10 years, they have tremendous assets and ridiculous advantages. I mean, all the things that people like us that we did at Grand Central or Dialpad or Google Voice, all these things, those are over the top, and we work like crazy to make those work well with the limitation that we don't have any control of the underlying networks, and we're trying to optimize just based on what's out there. So they do have, I mean, they have that asset as the network. They have access to all the customers. They have access to spectrum. They have access to, you know, to handset design and stuff. So they have ridiculous, they have envelopes they bill or they stuff every month. So if I wanted to be running one of these incumbents and making it more than just a dumb pipe, you know, the first thing I do, and it's just going to copy some stuff here, but, you know, innovate for one. Hey, you know, think of something innovative. All these amazing over-the-top services. If you were to integrate and have some of that built in-house and be able to build it in a way that it's not guys like us trying to figure out how to work with you in the most efficient way, but you would know because you did the entire thing, hey, that would be nice. Secondly, you know, I have, you know, real practical terms. I guess, you know, I'd fire half my lawyers and hire designers because it's, you know, it's all in usability and delight and like.
That's always a good idea, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I mean, rather than running to DC and the FCC and jumping up and down mad about people doing interesting stuff, you know, I'd get in the game and use these advantages that I have, you know, to help me. And it's, you know, I remember talking to a friend who was like running product at one of these large wireless companies that shall remain unnamed. And we were having drinks. I'm like, you know, this is kind of embarrassing, frankly. You guys have, I don't know, tens of millions of customers, you know, all this revenue, network, spectrum, wires, fiber, handsets, and you're getting out innovated by 20 guys in Fremont who have nothing more than a keyboard and an internet connection. And that's happening all over the place. So it would be nice to try to build that internally.
So stop right there. Quick show of hands. Impact of opening the network through open APIs. Does that change everything? Yeah?
You know, I don't think so. I mean, you have ways to it today, you know, and so you have to partner with people to get access, but open APIs, I don't think that the infrastructure guys are ever going to make that really easy for you.
But the business side of the house may say that, you know, that old axiom that all boats rise when the tide comes in, if we don't open the network, the history of communication says that interoperability and being inclusive is the way that everybody's successful, so we're busy shooting ourselves in the foot, so open up the network, right?
You know, well, I'd love it. I'm just not holding my breath.
So Steve, am I right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Thank you.
No, move on.
Anybody object?
No,
Where we need to go is the network, because it's this invaluable resource in terms of reach and functionality, can be leveraged by opening it up, and that's really the future of the CSP.
I think that's part of it, but it's not all of it. The question is, and I'm coming back to the very good point which you made about innovation. A lot of the time, the innovation is stifled by the existing OSS/BSS systems. It's a little bit like trying to run steeplechase with a boat anchor, right? So then the question is, how do you actually increase the agility of your OSS/BSS? And you know, what does it really mean in tangible terms? I mean, it sounds good when you say it fast, agile, but what does it really mean, right? And it means accelerating everything in terms of your offerings, and going back to the innovation, only your vision should be the limiting factor, not your OSS/BSS. So what does it really mean then? So if you go back to those 5 arrows, which you only have to imagine, right? One of those things which is in the middle is architecture. And a lot of the time, we lose sight of it. We've got RFIs, RFPs with gazillion features. Well, if you can imagine what products, and therefore what features, you will want to have in 3 or 5 years, you're in the wrong job. Should be in the stock market.
So I want to come back to one question, and then I'm going to play Oprah Winfrey and go antagonize people in the audience. Because we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we get your questions answered. Do you believe that the incumbent service providers globally, right, because of the restraints of their culture, can they move fast enough to retain their centrality, or are they going to fall by the wayside to guys like Craig?
Just like in any Darwin model, right? You'll have the people that will innovate and change. You can already see it. You already have global providers that are going out of markets rapidly. You show up in Stockholm, you show up the next day in Singapore, and they're talking about exactly the same carrier that doesn't happen to be in those locations, right? It will be up to each of the service providers, PTTs, to determine do they want to be part of it, or do they want to be cannibalized by one?
I'm going to jump in for 1 second because the airline industry is a really good analogy, which is you can't make it up in volume, right? So they go 20 years where 19 of them they lose money. That's not a really good business model. So you can't show up with the same service, right?
Well, no, I was saying to you, you can already start to see there's a list of service providers, and those guys in the enterprise can feel, and the ones that talk to you about UC, talking about SIP trunking, talk to you about being able to connect more than just one location, right? They exist, and what they're doing is they're going out and they're doing it globally, and what they're doing is offering differentiated services and taking huge market share away from incumbents.
Dave?
I actually think there's a good opportunity for network providers today, not for any real business reason, but mainly because of what we're expecting, what I'm seeing in the growth of video on the network. And there's video for video communications, but there's also just unicast TV watching. And I remember when the Cox sales guy was trying to sell me on an upgraded cable package. And I said, I don't need that upgraded cable package. And now I look around, I've got oftentimes 3 or 4 video streams, YouTube, what my wife is streaming on her Kindle, and I realized, darn, that guy was right. And I think that there's going to be a flood of video, especially as the equivalent of IPTV or some kind of video broadcast equivalent services are all being delivered over unicast. That's a one-to-one stream, and that's going to be a huge flood of network contention. So this smart pipe, will look pretty smart when you're facing against all that video.
And that's a service provider no-brainer.
Yeah.
Steve?
Can the incumbents be flexible enough? It's very hard to say. I think they're very big. They have a lot of lawyers. They're very bureaucratic. They probably need somebody that's an up-and-coming owner of networks. I don't know who that would be, but who could take the first step and push them.
Google?
Google, perhaps Google. They will push them, just like they pushed them into SIP trunking a few years ago. Without it, why would they ever do it? So they need some push, and then they have the wherewithal to do it. They have financial strength, but they need a push.
I think history has shown they're big and slow and resistant to change, and I think they actually like where they are no matter what they say. I mean, if you look at any ads, what's an ad you see for a carrier today? Who's got the fastest network? Who's got the biggest footprint? Who's got it's all network. They're all talking about the network. I'm 4G faster. I'm more cities. I'm everything. The only other ad you may see from a carrier is we have these cool handsets, and they don't even make those, and that's about it. So I think they're happy where they are.
Can I actually add one other thing? Because I think we're stereotyping. And
What if I said no? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
There are providers who are innovating. I mean, let's just not say that nobody. And I'll give an example. In France, Free Mobile, very disruptive entry. They have been providing the triple play. They have now entered that market. Very innovative solution with set-top boxes, which supplement their offering. Aggressively priced, €15.99 if you're their customer, no commitment, 3 gig of data. So I don't want us to be...
Yeah, but that's not an incumbent, right? I mean, they're the up-and-coming.
Well, we were talking about CSPs. I think the question was about CSPs, so,
Anyway, we have you're on ITExpo TV.
Okay, great. Bashir Halimi, Speech Mobility. My question is, what do you call a service provider who's offering a ton of value-added services to their subscribers and billing them tons of money for that? Do you call them dumb pipes or rich networks?
Great question.
So the question is
Or do you call them smart business people and let's get rid of the whole pipe thing? I mean, You want to amplify because you've stumped the panel.
Yeah, well, there's a network, and there's all the value-added services that service providers can take from third parties and offer to their customers. Now, their customers would like those services. They would pay for them. They pay the service providers, but these services came through the service provider. These value-added services came through the service providers, even if the service providers didn't actually build them. Right. So they're just looking for what the customer wants, bringing it together on an open platform and offering it to the customer and billing the customer, retaining the customer this way, upselling the customer this way. Now, I mean, if you want an analogy, is Walmart a dumb network? They have stores, they're successful, but they're selling products that they didn't build.
Anybody want to respond to that one?
So I would call them as actually a full service provider. And actually, you've got an excellent point because, in my opinion, this is one, nobody can do it alone today, right? So what you're describing is, call it an aggregator. If you look at NTT Docomo, their success in the early days was exactly due to that. And if you look at CSPs who are trying to get to the cloud and who are doing infrastructure as a service, their dream to do software as a service, which, by the way, has got a lot of issues. So I don't mean to demean bringing in together all of these providers. You have to, cloud aggregation is a very rich topic. So if you can do that, you're adding a lot of value, and potentially there's a lot of benefit.
So we have the benefit, speaking of benefits, of a service provider who would like to ask the panel a question.
Thank you very much. So yes, my name is Lucas Vandercroft. I'm with Vodafone, one of the... Vodafone. So we're the second largest carrier in the world, probably. For those who don't know, we have over 400 million subscribers around the world. But anyway, if I were hiring one of you for CEOs, I think the only candidate that might go further is David from Sonos, because he's the only one who really said to embrace change. Okay, I think we're all scratching the margins here. Part of this conference is about machine to machine. The expectations for billions of machines to be connected to the network in a few years are really not even being discussed here. And it's not about any of the stuff that you're talking about, okay? I call it all infotainment, whether it's video or RTC or whatever it is, it's all people communicating with one another. The big sea change is going to be machines talking to one another. And it's not the volume of data. It's the trust of the network and the security of the connections.
So anyone want to violently disagree with that?
No. Well, I mean, I think that's exactly what we've been saying, right? The network and the carriers and the incumbents have that as their primary asset. And secondly, I think inherent in what you just said is you're more focused on machine to machine than on user experience and end user. So, I'm not surprised.
No, I'm really not. See, the whole premise of the debate here is dumb or not. Dumb is a value judgment. We're talking about technology. There's nothing dumb or smart about it. It just is what it is. So, and what we've learned in recent years is that when you open things up to the community to innovate, you get a lot more fun and you get a lot more innovation. You go a lot further. And I think for operators to acknowledge that and open their stuff up and play their contribution in the billing, in security, and in providing the pricing plans that enable that, pricing is going to be a huge, major enabler of change.
I was going to make that point.
Go ahead.
That one of the challenges is, and I agree, that being a trusted provider is extremely important. I mean, if you think today about some of the services where your voice call could be scanned, people can throw ads at you, or that your email content is being scanned and they're throwing ads at you, or who knows what else they're doing with this. One sec, the question of remembering as the service provider that you are the trusted provider and that people need to hold on to their pricing. That Cox guy that I was negotiating with about my cable, I said, I don't need that service, and he dropped the price on me. So I got about $20 off per month. He should have held his price. He should have said, I'm giving you a great service. But he didn't. He lost his confidence. And so the fact is that if you're the trusted provider, I think people need to remember that there are value to these services.
I wanted to add that going back to, there's two things, right? Cost cutting and revenue enhancements. I totally agree that M2M is one of the revenue enhancement streams. In fact, we are one of the suppliers, maybe, I don't know if the only one, to Vodafone on M2M. And M2M is indeed coming very big. And we've also worked with Telenor Connection to roll out our platform to 23 different countries. So, point well taken about M2M. All I wanted to say, it's not the only revenue enhancement strategy which a provider should be thinking about.
So Mickey's hands are like this. So we got time for one more question, and then we're going to have to let everybody go offline and continue the conversation. Here's a scenario. What the service provider really has, along with the customer relationship, is their trust, right? In an online world where more and more of my volition is going to be online as opposed to physical, shouldn't the business that they're be hosting, leveraging that trust to host the virtual me? My desires, my volitions, the way I get authorized, my identity, isn't that the value-added proposition that really truly leverages what they have? Yes or,
Well, trust is a hard thing. I trust my carrier to provide me a high-quality connection. I don't necessarily trust my carrier to do the right thing with my personal information. Wasn't that long ago that...
You trust Google and Facebook, right?
I trust one of those two.
We'll talk later.
Yeah. But it was like right after 9/11, the large carriers were doing unauthorized wiretaps of people in the United States. Illegal. Congress went and gave them immunity afterwards. But, trust is eroded. I just got a class action thing for AT&T because they were overcharging me for USF. Trust is eroded. So, I trust them to give me high quality. I don't trust them to provide me excellent customer service.
So you don't.
Yeah.
So back to because we're running out of time. You don't trust them to host your virtual me.
No.
Nor do I.
Nor do you.
No, but I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, Peter, just the analogy, I don't trust my Porsche service tech take care of my dentistry. I like communication and online.
But I don't trust my, if I were you, I wouldn't trust my Porsche guy to take care of my Porsche.
Oh, no.
Right?
You and I will get into a fight right here. Don't do that.
Yeah.
But no, I look at it as being two different requirements.
Trust, customer service, and the offerings I want. How often do we get the spam mail where you get offerings which you've got no interest in, or even those which you already have provided to you? So I would say those three things is what I would be looking for from the service provider. I would say shoot ahead of the duck. That's the key.
Okay, so I promised that we were going to take a vote at the end, and we're going to. So based on what we just heard, how many people in the audience believe that 2 years from now that the service providers will be vibrant ecosystem central pieces of those evolving ecosystems, and that we won't be having sessions about dumb pipes anymore? We didn't convince enough people. Panels convinced. Anyway, with that said, thank you for bearing with us through all three of the featured sessions. We're going to give you a little break before we go into the rest of today's program. And how about a round of applause for the panel?